All right, we are here. We are a little late, but it is always good to be with you guys. Today we are going to be doing installment number 3 of Weekdays with the Dahadi and Angie, Marriage
The Dahadi.
and Ministry. Weekdays with Dahadi and Angie.
I think it said the Dahadi.
No, Weekdays with Dahadi. And so today, really, what we want to talk about is kind of one of it's not anti-vision, but it's vision. But like, how do we keep our marriage or our ministries from becoming our identity, our an idol, or even like what was the third one that we
Mistress.
our mistress, right? Which is often, so often a problem that we have so many times when you talk about ministry and marriage. And so I think this is going to be an important thing. And let me just kind of kick us off in talking about a story because I know for me, I am so driven. I'm a driven person. We are both driven people. And we can make the thing that's in front of us and the things that we're doing so easily, like kind of where we put all of our attention, all of our
Tunnel
focus.
vision.
Yeah, to be tunnel vision. And so one of the things that we oftentimes like reflect is like, how do we not make this our mission, like ministry, my mistress or our mistress or, our identity. And so for me, I know that is something that has constantly been something that's on my mind. So for instance, we have been married for what, 22 years, going on 22 years. We've been married for 22 years since 2001.
Yeah.
Literally, we were married before 11 days after 9/11. And after being married, we used to always say, I used to go around saying, hey, you guys, my wife and I have been married for 18 years, and 16 out of the 18 years, we've had people living with us. And 22 years and 18 out of the 22 years, people have been living, just like whatever it is. And ultimately, what you hear is people have been living with us. We were so bent on discipleship and disciple making and have people living with us. And, and I just remember we had some trauma that happened to us and our family. And so in 2020, we literally had to move into this house, and where we went from a lot of house to a very little house. We went from 5 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms. And so, and when we had 8 people living in our house, it was us, we had 3 girls and 3 boys. Mm-hmm. And we was like, that's the 3 rooms. So we no longer can have people living with us. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I went through a crisis. I was just like, I am in crisis because my identity was in people living with us, discipleship and disciple making. And that's when I started realizing, man, my ministry and the way I've been doing ministry ultimately was caught up in my identity. And it was about people living with us. And I still think it's a great way to go about making disciples. But this season of life, we were no longer able to do that. And I started recognizing my identity is wrapped up in that. And it was just like, and it was hard. It was really hard for me because I was like, we are now living in a house where we can't have people living with us and we can't be. And I was just like, what am I going to say when I'm out there? What is it like? And so like my identity, my ministry became my identity. Right. And we can no longer live in that. And so that was really a struggle for me. And so what are some things? And so today really we want to talk about that, we want to talk about like how things that we did to overcome that, things that we consistently do so that we don't make ministry, whether it's our identity, our mistress, or whether we make it an idol. And again, this is not going to be a beat 'em up kind of a thing. And this is not going to be like your marriage is your first ministry, like all those things, it's just like, that's not what this is. I don't really kind of take that your marriage is your first ministry. I think God has called us, right, to have a healthy, we cannot be, we cannot give what we do not have. And if we're not healthy, then we'll have nothing to give. That Angie is my priority. Angie is all of those things. My kids, I tell my kids all the time, hey, you guys, if it's between me and my wife, you guys are going to lose all the time because this is important.
They get
so
mad.
they get mad. And they're just like, that's not right. And I was like, listen, this is right. Because having that healthy core is the most important thing that we're doing. And so what would you say kind of just as initial, Angie, as you think about like marriage and ministry, when we talk about how to keep it from becoming your mistress, your idol, or even your identity.
Well, I think the first thing I think is that it is such a big temptation.
Yeah.
Like it really is especially for driven people, because it's like there's so much need and there's so many things that can be done, needs to be done, and so it's a black hole that you can get sucked into.
Yeah.
And
especially for people like me, where the question that's over my head is, do I have purpose? Am I purposeful?
That's a good point. Yeah. And for the marriages that I've had the privilege of counseling, it seems like that also is it doesn't matter how driven the wife is, if and when they have children, it seems like the marriages get divided. The husband is now in full-time ministry, and the wife has to take a step back and be at home with the kids a lot more, which doesn't allow her to be as involved as she was. And so then there's this divide, but then there's just always a battle of like, wait, what are you doing? You said you were coming home, so one, I think it's a huge temptation, and two, I think it's super common.
Yes. No, that's really good. So when we talk about this temptation and being common, I think that's really important. And so here's kind of, we want to give you basically 4 things, right? 4 things on how that we overcame that. And, first of all, we got to understand that this is a tension that we have no matter what. Like, you will have this. If you are married, marriage and ministry there's a natural tension in it. And this is kind of what Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, when Paul talks about, listen, like, he says, I'd rather you remain single, right? I'd rather you remain single because you'll be able to get focused. But he says, if that's not your gift, then don't do it. And so let me just read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7. He says this: I wish that all people were as I am, but each has his own gift from God. One person has a gift as another has a gift. I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain as I am. But if they do not have self-control, they should marry, since it is better to marry than to burn with the desire. So we talk about, Paul was saying, like, there is a natural tendency. Paul also goes on and says, like, listen, he's able to focus full time, giving as a single, like the superiority of being single and serving the Lord, being in ministry. He says, but there's a natural tension that is divided, that, when you get married, that your attention is going to be divided. So you got your marriage and you got your ministry. And so Paul says that it's natural. So first of all, the Bible tells us that there is that natural tension. And so, like, for us to try to act like there's no tension, then is for us to not recognize that the very honesty of the scriptures. Yeah. And so I think that that's something that's super important for us to recognize, that instead of us trying to pit these two together, to say that no, this is a tension that's meant to be managed. Mm-hmm. And it's okay, that we have that tension, right? And if you have the gift of being able to stay single, he says, do that. It's better. It's for the Lord, for the ministry, for what God is doing. But recognizing when you are married, there is a tension, mm-hmm. right? So I just think that is something that we just got to understand, right? And so here's 4 things, and we'll also put this in the chat or comments towards the end. But here's 4 things. We're going to go through this fairly quickly. Number 1 is building a foundation. Building a foundation. If we're going to keep our ministry, our marriages healthy, mm-hmm. and keep our ministries from being an idol and our identity, or just kind of giving over to it, we have to make sure that we're creating an identity. And when I'm talking about an identity, we have to create an identity between us. Yeah. So we talk about, like, Lewis Inc. So explain a little bit about Lewis Inc. and what's all that about, in terms of our identity.
It's when we get married, when anybody gets married, there's like 2 different cultures colliding. How your parents did something, how my parents did something. That's true of every marriage. But the idea of Lewis Inc. is we've got to create something new that we can both agree on, and not like, well, we're doing it my way, I'm doing it your way, like that type of thing. But no, there's a new foundation. There's something new being created here. The two become one, and they leave their
leave and cleave.
Leave and cleave. Yeah, they're a new thing. And so if you think about that, like in business terms, you're like, a new corporation just got birthed. You're not doing it the way Coca-Cola did it. You're not doing it the way that Dasani did, or that's probably the same. Pepsi.
You gotta come. You're creating
you're
a new
creating
product.
a new. Yeah.
And I think
the importance of that is there's something very honorable and like life-giving to say that this is who we are. Like, it's a reminder.
Yeah.
You know? Like, we do this. We have people live with us, rather than Dahadi likes people living with us.
Right.
You know, like, we have people living with us. And it's an agreed upon expression of who we are. And not that that's one of the foundations, but it kind of became one of the foundations.
But I think that's important. And so whenever you have this joint venture, nobody would start any ministry, start anything new without having a baseline. So we've created, like when we talk about establishing identity, we've created like worldviews, and that's kind of our statements, like our value statements. We've created, diagrams and missions, like those statements, so that we are intentionally forming a new identity, understanding that the two becoming one. And so what we always say is like, there's things that we're doing in the church that we ought to be doing in our marriage, right? You wouldn't launch a church or a ministry or anything, any type of initiative without saying values, a mission, vision, where are you going?
And he's talking literally, like, we have documents where we have a vision, we have worldviews, we have...
At one point we was talking about doing a website. We was talking about doing it. We didn't end up. We was just like...
ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, refer to the website.
Yeah. So we were just talking about, but what we're saying is establish an identity, build a foundation, create an identity. And I think that is so important that you have to have for your marriage. And ways that you can go about doing that is like, choose subject matters. Like, how are you going to parent? How are you going to, marriage and finances. And we literally would go to workshops and books, and we would read books together. We would do things literally where we're reading to one another or going and saying, what do you think about that? How did that impact you? How does that impact me? Let's talk about that and let's establish what we think, right? And we would create a new norm. So that's one thing that I think is important, is building a foundation or creating an identity. The second one is about blocking time. And this is about prioritizing. And I think that is really important, about prioritizing, because prioritizing lets us know like what's first, right? And so when we start off, whether it's a 90-day calendaring, a year, it's just like, how is this going to build? Again, because ministry, like you said, is a black hole, and it's going to suck up and it can continue to eat. But we have to do that. And so throughout our times, we've done things like date days, date nights, right? We've seen so many ministries and so many people, it's just like, they don't see the priority of getting out and doing date times and date nights and date days. It's like finding those times and finding that. And so when you block time, you prioritize.
I think even beyond like the actual date night, because I think that's huge. But we used to do, and now we kind of do it a little more organically with our calendars, but we used to have every Sunday we would sit with our calendar and we would plan out, like, there will be a date night in here. Like, when is that happening? If there was something going on with one child, it would be like, well, when are we getting time with this one child? It was about seasons, like, this is basketball season. We can't do, evening date nights because 4 nights of the week are basketball.
Yeah.
So like, okay, let's prioritize lunch on Thursday afternoon or breakfast on this day or whatever. But that Sunday time was critical. Like, we have a doctor's appointment here. We have this here. We're doing a college ministry here. We're doing this.
All the way down from like, who's cooking? What meals are we cooking this week? Do we need to go grocery shop? Like, so just like all those things that we do. And let me just say this as an extra and as a caveat. If you are moving to a new place, plant your family first before you try to plant your ministry, right? And I think that is so critical. So like, do all the things that making sure that you're going to make it home first, then go out. You want to have that secure place in order to do that.
We did that when we moved to Atlanta for the first 2 weeks. It was like we were on vacation. We took the kids to all the fun places. We went to the DMV and transferred all the license and turned on all the utilities. And you didn't just leave me to do all that on my own and figure it out. But we also made Atlanta, like we got on the MARTA and got off at every stop just to see what it was like.
And it's just making sure.
Yeah.
And because I see so many times people in ministry, whether it's a husband or the wife, they go out to do the job, and then the person who's staying at home is like, what am I saying? They're trying to figure it out, and they're not making friends. So establish your family. So again, blocking time. It's about prioritizing. The number 3 is blessing fund. And this is about capacity. When I think about blessing fund, it's not just about money, but it is about your time, your talent, and your treasure. What are you going to give to bless? And so this was important because I came from this like a family that's give, and just like, even if you don't have it, give, and Angie came from a family more save, right? Make sure that you're building security so that you have, in the future. And so what we had in terms of our attention, right, it was just like boom. And so I was ready to give, and she was ready to save and like create security. And so it just became that tension, and we learned from one another, and just the benefits of both. So we would establish a budget, but in our budget, we would say, what is a blessing fund? So you can do that with your time, your talent, and treasure. So instead of just going into that black hole of ministry, oftentimes, you know exactly what you can give.
And the arguments can get so creative because, like if you call your thing generous, right? And it's like, oh, well, that's more godly to be generous with my time, my talent, my treasures, right? And then I would call mine more stewardship, and so I can make mine more godly. And then we're going to constantly fight over that unless you come up with like, we want to be both. We want to be good stewards and we want to be generous stewards. So, yeah, like the idea of creating that identity, like the budget is kind of like truth. It's numbers, it's facts. This is what comes in. This is what can go out. It's no longer ambiguous. It's planned. And same with the calendar. It's truth. There's only 24 hours in a day. There's only 7 days in a week. You can't make up more.
So when you're able to do that, your time, your talent, and your treasure, like you need to be both a good steward and a generous steward. I love those words, and just like figuring out how do we do that. And so what is your capacity? So again, practical things that we've done was like we established a budget, and in that budget we says, hey, we have this amount of extra time or this amount of extra dollars that we can give. And so what happens is that for, especially like if we're talking about dollars, that blessing fund rolls over. Say there's no need in the month of July, right? But then in August, there is a need. Well, we haven't given, like blessed anybody financially since August. So we have what we can do. But when that money's out, then we don't have the extra resources and money, unless it's something like major, then we got to pull from savings. But we rarely try to ever do that to pull from something. But when you have like that blessing fund, it is important. So it's like, we have things like intentionally taking people out to eat, or intentionally meeting, like someone can't pay a bill, or we intentionally set aside money, not if those things happen, because we know they are going to happen based upon what we do. So when they happen, we are ready.
Well, and the same for time. We think about like right now, one of our routine rhythms is Saturday. It's kind of like that.
Yep.
The blocked day. I guess that's the opposite. It's not a fund. It's more of a
stewardship. It's a stewardship.
That'd be more of a good steward.
Yeah.
Saturday. It doesn't matter what comes up. I mean, within reason, But it's like we just don't do anything on Saturday.
It's our Sabbath.
It's our Sabbath, and it's our Sabbath together.
Because I think it's important because like for us, like she works pretty much 7 days a week because like she manages the Airbnb and all those things. But I work like in terms of ministry 6 days a week, right? Because like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And so it's like, we got to have a day where we're not going to do anything, and so I think that is something that is really important, that is both in the blocking time, but then also knowing what I give of my time, because like I'll have a certain day that is my blessing fund. It's my day that I don't necessarily work in terms of what I get paid but one of those 6 days is days that I have as a blessing fund. I get to do and bless people with my time, but I'm not like demanded or required to give of my time. So it is like, in a lot of ways, it's a blessing fund of my time.
It's the things that you don't have to call and be like, can we spend this? Because
Right.
it's a part of the fund. Or
Right.
do I have time to do this? Is it okay if I don't come home at 6?
Yeah, so I think that's it. The final one is, again, this is the recap. It is building a foundation, which is about creating identity, blocking time, which is about prioritizing, a blessing fund, which is about your capacity, whether it's your time, talent, and treasure. And the last one is being sensitive. Being sensitive. And this is about keeping posts with one another, like creating that space with one another and just constantly being a check-in with one another, because I think it's so important, because oftentimes, especially for me, it's like I'll figure out, like it's like I feel like it's like a code or even a combination, like oh, it's 20 15 10, right? And then I'll try to go and implement that same combination all the time, but the combination changed. And so part of this is that I need to be sensitive to one another, right? Because what ends up happening is that if you don't, like, if you're not sensitive to one another, what you will end up doing is that you will end up applying the same thing every time. Okay, I know Angie likes this, so let me just go do that, and I'll just go do it, and then I'll just get back to what I'm doing, right? And this is kind of like, and we miss each other so often because something that was helpful for her 5 months ago or even 5 years ago, I think is still helpful, and I just go do that instead of having kind of that sensitivity. So we got to keep posts with everyone.
Yeah, I think also what I'm noticing in marriages and what I see is there's a lot of like when the husbands, and what I'm seeing in counseling, and it could probably go the other way, but is that the wife is at home and she's killing it because she's an amazing woman and she's, juggling all these different things. And the husband has the mentality like, she's got it.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about that aspect of life because she's got it. But there's all these balls that are getting dropped in life. Like in ministry, there's this, we don't have this at the church. This person needs to be met with. This person needs to be that. And so he goes out and he becomes the answer to all the problems. But all the while, the wife is at home like, I really need your time.
Right.
Like, I don't need you to answer questions, or I don't need you to answer the problems because, maybe she is killing it. But so I'm seeing
I am
that too.
I think that is such a strong point, because for me, that is exactly so much of our marriage. Angie, anybody knows she is the backbone. She is the strength. I'll get up front, but
I didn't volley that for you to like.
No. But I think, and so oftentimes what ends up happening is that I'm like, oh, Angie's good. I can go out and conquer the world because the home, it's great. I don't have to worry, and oftentimes I totally miss because of not being sensitive, not having those check-ins. And again, that's where my ministry can become
like
kind of a mistress or an idol, or because I'm constantly checking in there, but I'm saying because it's good, I'm not checking in.
Yeah. But even beyond the checking in, it's so hard. Like ministry is, we've both been in that world where it's like, they need me, they need me. There's so many needs. I think about like Hope Hill and wanting to like, I can just give another couple hours. I can just show up on Saturday. I can just do this too. Like they're all little things, but they add up. And it is okay to say no.
Yeah.
Like God is still at work. I was reading Esther this morning, and it's like God's not mentioned in Esther. And one of the points that like came up was just like God's at work even when we don't hear His name, or we don't like recognize that He's working, or we can't attribute to, like, there's not like a big miracle happening. He's at work. So
yeah, I think that's really good. And just recognizing that God is at work, even when we
have to say no.
Have to say no. That's what Sabbath is. Like when you do Sabbath, you say, God, I'm about to stop, but I know that you're even at work when I'm not, right? And so it's like, I think that is a critical piece that we have to be able to do. And so we're going to do another one on, when we start doing this in a more regular rotation, whether it's going to be Mondays in marriage or whatever. But we're going to do another one that's talking about the opposite, you know, is that when the other spouse gets
Bitter.
jealous, bitter about,
Resentful.
you know, that. And I think that that is important. But before we let you go, Loretta, I think that's a great question that you have, you know, and I just really want to say that it is important, like for me and for Angie, as you know, we talk about the pastor's wife. What I remember in this, like early on in Blueprint and anytime, it's like, listen, there is no biblical role for pastor's wife. There is no, and it's like really explaining that. And I says the same responsibility that we have on all of our members of the church is the same responsibility that we have on her. So she is not going to play a specific role. And this is the reason why, especially at our church, we have Titus 2 women. We're about to launch Titus 2 men. It's because we want to make sure that when, like, even though Angie, she's a chair of the Titus 2 women, but we wanted to make sure that, hey, here's the women that we are pointing you to. Here's the men that we are pointing you to that are going to care for you, who are going to do all of those outside of the elders. And so I think it's really important that you don't fall into this kind of, I have to just play this role, but you have to talk about that on the front end, in the middle, and on the back end, so that you don't end up doing that.
Wonderful job at like doing that on the front end for sure.
Right.
Like saying that out loud to people. People still have their expectations and assumptions, but I think the sensitivity piece, because it's easier to say on the front end and then like forget that it's an issue, but checking in, like husbands, that would be my challenge to you. Check in with your wife and ask, like, are there unrealistic expectations being put on you? How are you feeling about that? Those type of questions, because I mean, there's always something, and that's an opportunity to just kind of breathe life back into her and to remind her that no, you should not have to do that. That's not your role. Like, you have an opportunity to if you'd like, but you know.
Yeah, that's good. I'm just gonna put these in the memo. Any other questions that you guys have are in the chat. Yeah, type them in here. But just wanting to make sure that we are establishing a strong foundation, right, in our ministry and marriages, and just the tension that we have of trying to give, but at the same time recognizing that we got to be a good steward. So we want to be generous, but we want to be a good steward. We want to serve, but we also got to understand the importance of having a strong home base. And so I just really want to encourage you guys. Like, we're going to keep doing these videos probably once a week. I'm on weekdays with Dottie at least 3 to 4 times a week, but at least once a week, I'm going to bring on the smarter version of me, and then we're going to
I can't even spell these words.
we're going to talk about this, and I think it's really important. So put number 3 on there too. So we're excited. So you guys, we will see you Monday. And again, what do you think? Marriage Mondays? You
that or Wifey Wednesdays. So
Wifey Wednesdays, Marriage Mondays. So we'll figure that out. But we love you guys. Put in the comments, what are some things that you want us to talk about? We are going to do something on kind of the opposite side, when the spouse can become bitter at the ministry. And so we just want to talk about real things, right? But this is marriage and ministry, because when we're committed to making disciples, when we're committed to doing the Lord's work, like Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, there's a natural tension that's in there, right? We're not doing anything wrong. There's a natural tension. So let's embrace the tension and let's manage it well. All right, saints, we love you. We appreciate you. And until next time, peace.